Hello, my name is Bill Haley for Haley 2024 Government Reform Ideas. This video is going to be a little bit different. It's not talking about my government reforms. It's going to be talking about the current system and how we should stop funding programs and setting a policy through lawsuit settlements. So what am I talking about here? This problem should receive much more study than I can provide it. It is a huge problem, and it creates many different issues, and it's hard to dive into any one of the issues very deeply. I'm taking the surface area view on this, so let's go through it real quick. I'm breaking this video down into two sections. This one's going to concentrate on big banks and tobacco. Other videos will discuss some other issues in a second. Congress and state legislators should create law. That's the way our system works. We have a three-branch system of government: executive, legislative, and judicial. Congress or the state legislature should create the law, create all funding, create all policies. Now, obviously, in my view, I'm more libertarian. I want government to create a lot less policy. I go to a competitive governance system, but that's not this discussion. The state legislature or the Congress in the current system should set law and spend money, but we have too much going through lawsuit settlement. So all government spending should go through legislation. All government regulations and laws should go through legislation. So the legislative branch makes those laws, creates that spending, does the proper taxing of the proper way. Too often the courts are allowing spending and policy to come through lawsuit settlements. So we're going to get into that. The executive usually is happily signing off on it. So the executive department, the governor or the president wants certain policy. They can't get it through legislation. So they are happily inviting a lawsuit, or they are suing themselves through the attorney general and the like. They are suing themselves, certain businesses, big, huge businesses, to promote the lawsuit. These are spending or policies they cannot get through the legislative branch. So we'll talk about that, how that relates in a minute. Okay, this blog was created in 2017. I'm updating a little bit and going to back doing the video in 2023, January right now. This video concentrates on big banks and tobacco. And the next video is going to concentrate on a lot more. Let's talk about those other issues real quick. I just list them real quick. Okay, voting laws was huge in 2020. Marriage laws happened in 2015 in different time frames for different aspects of it. Monopoly law, dealing with a monopoly, discrimination law, civil asset forfeiture, price fixing, kind of goes back to the monopoly law and the like. Healthcare laws, Roe versus Wade and gay marriage, and EPA type of law. So we're going to address that in other videos. I might touch on a tad bit here, but I have split it up as this became too much, even going to the service level. And we're going to concentrate on a few cases, and one's going to be suing the big banks for mortgages and the like. An advocacy group sues a big bank claiming abuse regarding mortgages, or the executive, the attorney generals, the state's attorneys general will sue the big banks over, in my opinion, not big issues, but very subjective issues, claiming abuse and the like. But they are at risk because the government's suing them, or third party suing them, and the bank, meaning the executive, is corresponding with them. Or accepting the deal in a way to make policy and do a lot of funding. Banks were forced by the regulators and the Justice Department to predatory lend. In my opinion, many of the Justice Departments, especially back in the early 1990s, and many other times too, but specifically I'm thinking 1990s, early 1990s, to do predatory lending. Very heavy-handed pressure came from the Justice Department to increase minority lending. Then they sue the banks for that lending, for predatory lending. The only way to get minority lending up, and there's arguments about this, no doubt about it, but a very big way to get minority lending up is to reduce standards for minorities. Reduce lending standards. So how much income you have versus the value of your house versus the interest rate and the like. There's standards. If you reduce the standards, you have much more failed mortgages. And there's a lot of problems with failed mortgages. The standards are there to protect the bank, but also for the consumer. So when you lower the standards, you're lowering the protections for the minority lender, borrower, the minority borrower. And that causes a lot of problems in their lives. And as a whole, statistically, the minorities get hurt tremendously when you lower the standards. But that's the only way that some banks think that they can get that minority lending up. Because if there's discrepancies between white and black in lending, then these banks are going to get sued or really get talked down to and lose a lot of credibility in the eyes of the consumers by being declared discriminators and the like, racist and the like. Okay, so this particular case was a $25 billion agreement, provides homeowners relief and new protections to stop abuse. This is a 2012 case, and it focuses on $25 billion agreement with 5 of the largest mortgage services to address mortgage loans, servicing, and foreclosure abuse. So whether the abuse or not is regardless of the point, whether it's legitimate or not. The Department of Justice is hugely powerful. They go to the court and they can put a lot of damage to these to these mortgage companies. So they have to play ball. The Department of Housing and Urban Development. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm sorry. If you want to pause, you can read a lot of it. But the point I want to get across here is 49 state attorneys general, which means almost every state has reached the landmark agreement. So this is across all the states almost, which means it's almost like a tax because it's across all the states. So they're all going to get benefits from this and, in my opinion, a lot of negatives from it. And it's the 5 largest mortgage services. So it's almost taking care of almost every mortgage to deal with these quote unquote foreclosure abuses. Now, again, there's a lot to discuss whether it is truly abusive or whether it is using those words to create this lawsuit and get the benefits or the policy that they want. They could not get through legislation. The 5 largest means it's like a tax on all mortgages. So whatever these banks have to pay out, they have to collect. The only place they can get the money, only place big banks get the money to pay out these fees or these settlements is from the consumers, the people who borrow the money. They have to raise that rate from, let's say, 5% to 5.5%. That extra 0.5% pays this. It comes from the consumer. There's no other place for it to come from. $20 billion in spending. It acts like government spending. So that is to financially relieve consumers. Well, where are they getting that money? They have to increase that rate from 3% to 3.5%. Whatever percentage it is, they have to increase that percentage. They have to increase fees. They have to increase something to be able to pay that money. So are they really relieving the consumers? It has to come from them. Plus all the extra legal fees means there's a lot of extra fees in there that's just going to lawyers and the like. And in my view, the policies are not the best to try to help relieve the consumers. It actually does harm to those consumers. A lot of times funding to consumers or funding from government to people, on the most part, harm those people. Okay, refinancing their loans. Agreement also requires substantial changes in how the services do business. It requires substantial changes. That is a legislative thing. If we're gonna have government forcing businesses to do agreements in a certain way, that has to go through legislation. I personally think it should be a lot less, and businesses have a lot more leeway, so better ones can show that they're better and better for the consumer, and they will get more business. But substantial changes in how they do business means that's legislative type of things. Obama's wish list was not legislation. Obama came up with the wish list, and regardless of whether you like that wish list or not, that's not legislation. So these banks were forced by the lawsuit settlement by the attorneys general of the states, from the federal government and the like. They were forced through lawsuit settlement to do these standards that came from Obama's wish list of the Bill of Rights, Homeowners' Bill of Rights. So that wasn't passed by legislation. If it was passed by legislation, it'd be a little bit differently. But this was not legislation. It was a wish list by Obama, put into effect through the courts, and the courts are not legislative. Going to people who timed the market wrong. So these benefits went to consumers who timed their buying decisions wrong. They're underwater on their mortgage right now, which means they owe more money than the mortgage is worth, which means the home value fell. A lot of reasons why the home value fell. That's a different aspect, but they timed the market wrong. How is that a good government policy? Did it go through legislation? That would be horrible legislation. This is a horrible policy. It does a tremendous amount of damage. However, and then it also goes to people who are delinquent. So the people who were made the same amount of money as somebody else, two different people making about the same amount of money. One paid off their boat loan and kept their boat. One didn't pay off their boat loan, lost their boat, but they used the money to pay the mortgage. They're not delinquent on their mortgage. The person who paid for their boat loan, they're now delinquent on their mortgage. They get that benefit of mortgages being redone, or benefits, money being applied to the mortgages so they're not underwater anymore. So it's a huge moral hazard. And let's just keep on going on, or this video will be too long. Unemployment, anti-blight, and military orders. These are all legislative things that, if it shouldn't happen in the first place. However, if this need to happen, and some of it's okay, anti-blight legislation can be okay. Unemployment, maybe somewhere it can be okay. But is the bank responsible for somebody losing their job, or responsible for an area being in blight and being in bad condition and looking bad? Is banks responsible for military orders? So money going towards that? You can call that legislation. I mean, you can. This is more of a legislative thing in some instances, or government spending, military orders and the like. Hey, government spending to help pay, people who are changing orders. That might be a legitimate government spending thing for the military to do. Anti-blight, yeah, it's problematic in many areas, and I don't want to get into that area right now, but is that a bank's responsibility? No, these are things that they could not get through legislation. They could not get the funding or the policies through legislation, and they're doing it. Bribing states. The agreement requires the service to pay $5 billion in cash to the federal and state governments. So that's insane. You're bribing states. If a state does not take it, then they just lose out on it. And so they are motivated to be bribed. And just because it's done a legal bribe does not mean it's still not bad. Bribery is bad. So you are forcing states to do things that are harmful to its own citizens, because it's going to be done to them anyway. The state's at least going to get some money from it. To fund outside groups that are likely highly partisan groups. So it goes to legal aids and similar public programs determined by state attorneys general. That's highly problematic. This is government spending on programs. Big banks give money to my political allies to do political campaigning in a lot of instances, or at least give major donations, and there's very problematic. I'm not going to get into that right now, but that is highly problematic. Fortune.com and MarketWatch articles state that money went to homeless shelters, horse stables, for like police horse stables and like mental health issues, pension plans, and over $1 billion that could not be tracked. So banks have to pay money for homeless shelters, horse stables, mental health programs, pension plans. What expertise do they have in doing that well? And this is more acting like government policy, government spending and government policy. And then obviously if $1 billion cannot be tracked, we're looking at significant fraud, or at least lack of transparency to a very large degree. We see the same when it comes to drug companies. So let's just go through this real quick. The government bureaucrats knows that they can extract concessions from pharmaceutical companies, so getting away from banks for a minute, so they can extract concessions from pharmaceutical companies when they hold the keys to the FDA approval. So when the big FDA or other regulators in cahoots with the FDA say, I want you to fund this or that or this, and by the way, you want that approval for your drug? Well, you might make $1 billion, so you're not going to mind giving $100 million to a couple programs out there, likely partisan programs, a lot of partisan people running those programs and doing things that they should not be doing. That's more of a government funding, government tax, because hey, a drug company has to increase their prices to pay that extra $100 million, then to pay out that. So it's more like a tax because it's going across a very wide group of people to pay for that. And a lot of times it's government paying those bills, Medicare, Medicaid, and the like. So it's highly concerning. And then also to do programs or to pay for things that's acts like government spending, government taxes, and a lot of government policies. Hey, you implement these policies, and then you might be able to get approval. So that holding that over their head is tremendous. When tens or hundreds of millions of dollars are at stake, concessions and settlements are easily extracted. The drug companies end up voluntarily, with air quotes there, funding programs outside of government that the executive bureaucrats wanted and could not get through Congress. So I was just kind of talking about that. There is a common argument that laws against price gouging, predatory pricing, and collusion can always be threatened. So this is another issue. I'll talk about this more on the other video, but I just wanted to bring it up real quick. One is price too high, one is price too low. Inclusion is when you match prices with the competitors. Many companies have been threatened and usually given to the government's or politicians' demand because the price of going through that legislation or that lawsuit is so high. So they give in on doing what the government officials want them to do. Because, hey, it might only cost them $100 million, but this lawsuit's costing them billions in business and the like. We saw Microsoft not playing ball with politicians in the 1990s, and they were slapped with a major monopoly lawsuit. And most of the issues, just 5 to 10 years later, they were not a monopoly on, but they had to go through tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars worth of a lawsuit. And they finally started playing ball politically, giving a lot more money. They weren't giving money to political donations to a large degree in the early 1990s. And now, 10 years later, in the early 2000s, and ever since, people learned to play ball. And it's a nasty game. Okay, a lot of money from big tobacco. Let's just stay with big tobacco here for a minute. I got a lawsuit here from 2013. 15 years later, where did all the cigarette money go? So this is late 1990s, where they did a massive settlement for big tobacco with causing healthcare expenses. So this is a tobacco tax. So when you get charged $246 billion in settlements throughout large portion of the tobacco industry, then the only place that money can come from is from increasing sales. It's very similar to a tax. If the government taxed the tobacco companies directly, only place they can get that money is what they're doing now. The company gets the dollar. The government, they have to charge $2, a dollar for the company, a dollar for the government. They look at this the exact same way. This tobacco settlement. So it never was passed through legislation as a tax, but it acts exactly the same. They have to collect that money from the consumers buying the cigarettes, and then they have to pay out to a lot of things, and we'll go over that here. But over 25 years, that's a long-term tax and long-term spending. So late 1990s, this means that 25 years is about up. This is a 2013 article, so I don't know exactly where it stands right now. It's hard to follow up. I don't have the resources for that. But let's just keep on going. This is like government spending. Voters decided in this article from the wherever this article was from NPR. It stated that the voters decided where 80% of that money where that money goes. So smoking related programs, that's more like a government program, and maybe it's not even a bad government program, but that's where legislation has to come in, tax, and then spend money on that program to stop or help people stop smoking, advertising and the like. Maybe that's worthwhile. Don't like most of it. More libertarian for my aspect. I'm more libertarian than these people would be, but I can see where that could be a legitimate legislative endeavor to try to stop people from smoking. However, this is the legislation issue, not a government, judicial, and settlement issue, because it acts like a tax, and it's spending like a tax, and it's medical, and it's government policies like a government laws and regulations that should be going through legislation, not by lawsuit. The dangers of socialized medicine. Okay, this is a little bit off topic, but this is the dangers of socialized medicine. So the Attorney General of Mississippi says that they should not be forced to pay for things that are smoking-related diseases. Well, who says that you should be paying for any healthcare at all? You jumped into that, and that's the dangers of socialized medicine, of government paying for healthcare. Now they get to rule of your life. They get to control your life a lot more than they did before, because they get to say, now you don't get to smoke, or you have to do this or that. So it creates a huge problem in controlling people. The dangers of government as a healthcare provider or a payer of last resort. You can read this, but it's going to be a long video if I keep on going. But such thing as lung cancer, heart disease, emphysema, low birth weight, and others was told in this 1994 interview, the state is obligated to pay for our citizens. Well, why? Why are they obligated to do it? That was a legislative decision for them to do that. That's what's so dangerous about socialized medicine and government getting involved in that, because now they get to control that. That action causes negative effects, and we have to pay for those negative effects. Therefore, we get to control you. So a little bit off topic, but in a very big way related, and talking about this. And it creates a situation. This is a lawsuit. This is not legislation about paying for citizens. Well, it is legislation paying for citizens' health care, but now it's a lawsuit settlement dealing with now we get to control because of smoking-related diseases. Okay, more sued, and now in the direct payment line from that lawsuit, dangerous self-dealing. Moore became a director for a organization that was paid for by the tobacco settlement. That is open corruption when somebody puts themselves in the line of funding of a lawsuit that they contributed to, that they led in government. So they led a government lawsuit. They got a huge settlement, and now he gets out of office and now gets in that line of funding. So huge corruption out there in the open that needs to be dealt with. This is like funding the general state budget like a tax. All taxes belong in the legislative branch. So the tobacco settlement included money specifically to fund public service announcements. So what's that? Public service announcements. But Moore says that most of the settlement money came with no strings attached, and that it made it impossible to hold states accountable. So no strings attached, just money coming into the states. That's like a tax. It's no different than a tax. And that has to go through the legislative branch. And then the legislation gets suspended. Yeah, there is legislation that gets suspended now. So that part goes to legislation. But the taxes coming in, that was not a tax. It acts like a tax. It acts like a tax, but it's a lawsuit settlement. So it's still the company collecting money, just like they would from a tax, but did not get taxed by the legislation. Let's see. Settlement agreement, not legislation. So it was understood without being codified into this agreement. So it's being codified. So it's understood without being codified into the agreement that states would make a big investments in healthcare related to smoking. So this was not legislation. This was codified into the settlement agreement, not legislation, that the states would make big investments in this, the money. So again, half of it's legislation, half of it, but not the money coming in, but the money going out. So the legislation is spending big businesses' money. That's not right. Or it's outside of the three branches of government, the proper roles for them. Okay. 14% of the money went to tobacco taxes and anti-smoking programs. So 14% went to that. Where'd the other money go to? Some went to fixing potholes, some went to pension plans, and some actually went to pay tobacco farmers. The source of the tobacco, the source of the nicotine, the source of the problem at the root level, the tobacco. It gave tax relief, gave money for financial assistance to tobacco farmers. How perverted is that? And again, a little bit off topic, but it just shows how perverted this can be. Okay, this video concentrates on banks and tobacco. There's so much more on a separate video. So we're at 28 minutes. We'll probably be at 30 minutes on this video. I'm going to do a separate video touching on these two subjects a little bit, but touching on the other subjects as well. Voting law, marriage laws, monopoly laws, discrimination laws, civil asset forfeiture. I can't dig down deep into it because it just take too long. Price fixing, healthcare laws, Roe versus Wade, Obergefell, the gay marriage issue, EPA. So I'm going to touch on those. A lot to be considered. This whole blog is on my website. Hopefully you will find this on my thing, but look in my blog section. You will find the blog that's related to this. I have a lot of blogs up there, but at Haley2024.org. Hopefully things are linked in wherever you find the video. Until the next video.